You can earn more than 90% of Australians and still feel nowhere near wealthy. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly why that is with the actual numbers and what it takes to close the gap. Hey guys, if you're new here, my name is Mitch and I'm a husband and father closing in on 40 years old. I've spent the last couple of decades around finance, investing, and just trying to build wealth for my family and myself. And this channel is really just about breaking stuff down in plain language, so everyday Aussies like you and I may be able to get a better understanding of some complex topics. And as a result of that, hopefully make some better financial decisions. Point 1, where do Australians actually stand? Before we get to the top 10%, let's set the scene, because most people genuinely have no idea where they sit. The average full-time worker in Australia earns around $104,000 per year, but more than 3/4 of full-time workers earn below this figure. The average gets pulled upward by a small number of extremely high income earners, so I don't think it's a great reflection of what most people are actually taking home. A better number to work with is the median figure, and the median full-time worker earns around $90,000 a year. So half of all Australians are more than this and half are less than this. So you may wonder where the top 10% actually start, and the figure is $133,000 a year. If you're earning around that number, this is probably where things may feel a little bit confusing, because $133,000 a year doesn't feel like top 10% money if you're living in Brisbane paying a mortgage or you're in Sydney paying for rent. But that really is the number, and only 1 in 10 Australians that you speak with are going to be earning more than this. So if you're above that line, you are genuinely in a small minority, even if the day-to-day life and your finances don't feel like that. And that's exactly why we need to talk about wealth in the next point. And this is where things do get a little bit interesting, because income tells you what is coming in every single month, whereas wealth tells more of the story. And it's the money you're actually keeping and investing and growing, which is going to stay, hopefully, around for many, many years to come and continue to grow. So they're not really the same thing. Now, one tricky thing when we do look at wealth and averages and numbers is that if we include the whole population, the figures can be a little bit misleading. And that's because you've got retirees who've spent decades upon decades accumulating these assets, and these assets that they've been accumulating have been growing at a significant rate. So let's take a look at it by age group, because I feel that that's a more useful comparison, particularly for those of you who are going to be watching this. Now, we're going to draw on a couple of very well put together studies that have gone through the income and household wealth. And here is where Australian households actually sit. If you're aged 25 to 40, the typical household net worth is $238,000, and that's actually the median. So half of all people will be less than this and the other half more. And if you're 41 to 64, the typical household net worth is up to $809,000, a significant increase. And guys, here's where the numbers get more interesting, because those figures I just gave you were the median or the middle of the road. And to crack the top 10% when it comes to wealth across all households, you need a net worth of just over $2.5 million. That's your home, your super, your investments, cash, minus any debt that you have. So the top 10% by wealth hold nearly half of all household wealth in Australia, with an average net worth of around $5.2 million. And the bottom 60% average just $343,000. And if you want to see how concentrated the wealth is, to be in the top 1% for your age group, if you're in that 25 to 40 bracket, you need $3.1 million, and it's $7.7 million if you're in the 41 to 64 bracket. And I know that the top 1% is not the goal here, but the numbers tell you something pretty important about the shape of how this distribution works. Most of the wealth sits at the very top, and the gap between the median and the top is huge. But here's the part that I think really matters. You can be a top 10% income earner when you're on $133,000 or more per year and still be sitting at around that median wealth figure for your age group. The income is coming in, but if it's going straight back out through a mortgage, car finance, and lifestyle costs, the wealth just is not building. So the point there is that income and wealth are related, but they're really not the same game. All right, so I want to give my take on the numbers, and here's what I actually think. These figures mean a very different thing depending on where you live. So $133,000 per year in a rural Queensland town is a genuinely different financial life to $133,000 per year in Sydney or Melbourne. The number is identical. The cost of housing, cost of living, and the day-to-day feeling of breathing room financially, none of that is identical. They're actually completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And that's why I think location is actually one of the most underrated financial decisions you can make. I know it's easy to say, but you don't have to move cities, but potentially moving a little bit out of the city and having a significantly cheaper or a significantly larger and nicer place to live, if that's what you're chasing, can save you a whole lot of money and a whole lot of heartache. I personally know plenty of people who would choose to live in the city just because they feel like it's got this lifestyle that they wouldn't want to part with. But when you really break it down, is it really worth all of that extra cost? And second to this is actually lifestyle inflation. And honestly, I'll say that this is something that myself and my family, we've struggled with over the years. And it's very, very easy to get caught up in the temptation as your income goes up to match that with the bigger house or the newer car or the up-spec'd car that you probably don't need, or bigger and better holidays than you've had in the previous years. But the problem with this is when this happens before the wealth is built, this is when it becomes a real issue, because you're spending what could be invested in growing your wealth on things that are giving you a benefit in the short term without actually looking at the long term. So if you've gone and borrowed the max that the bank would lend you for the house, or you've upgraded your car every 2 to 3 years instead of every 5 to 7 years, or every pay rise became a reason to go out and buy yourself new things, new lifestyle upgrades, clothes, jewelry, whatever it may be, instead of it becoming an investment, then the gap between what you're earning and what you own never really closes. And that's a lot of the time the difference between the people who are moving away from the median when it comes to their net worth versus those who stay stuck. Really what my goal is to make sure that gap is working for me and my family. And it doesn't mean we're going to go without and things like that. But it's about understanding it, sitting down and going through the numbers so that it doesn't get away from you to a point where you can't bring it back in. And honestly, the biggest one here is a high income does not automatically become wealth. The people who do move from a top 10% income to genuine wealth do, as I said before, set their life up deliberately. It doesn't just happen by accident for the majority of people. So it's about the right location, consistent savings and investing, having a plan for this, and investing in assets that do grow while they continue to get on with the rest of their life. So really, wealth is built when you're doing things with intention. So if you are earning good money, but you feel like you're not really getting ahead, then the suggestion would be just to look at where you sit against those age-based wealth benchmarks that we just went through. And that gap between your income and your net worth is exactly what you want to keep unpacking and looking to see if you can implement some of these things to try and close it. And that's exactly what we're going to go through as we continue on building this channel. Guys, so there it is, $133,000 a year does put you in the top 10% for income. But to crack the top 10% for wealth, you do need just over $2.5 million in net worth. And as we said, the typical Aussie, age 25 to 40, has $238,000. So the gap between what you earn and what you own is where I think most people's financial journey is actually going to live. And if that gap sounds familiar to you, then the next video is exactly what you're after, as I'm going to break down some of the simple ways for Aussies to get started with investing. So I'll see you there.